Good Saturday morning, everybody, and welcome into the Alabama pregame show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. I'm Simone Eli alongside Matt Scalisi. If you didn't know, it is the third Saturday in October, and that only means one thing. Alabama versus Tennessee, the big rivalry game. Is it really a rivalry? We're going to break all of that down, but it's week 8 of the college football season. We are rolling right through, Matt. It's getting cold outside. It's feeling kind of fall-like. Can you believe it? Already the third Saturday in October. Where did the time go?
Crazy how fast this happens now that it's like back on a normal schedule again, and we're not having a delayed start or any of the stuff we had to deal with last year. It's very nice outside. This is the only game going on in the state today, so Alabama has all the attention for folks in our market. And I don't want to make early predictions, but it definitely is going to be cigar smoking weather by the time this game is over.
It certainly will. That we've already got some folks saying they got their cigar ready. Hours before the game kicked off at 6:00 on ESPN at Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa. So a night game, going to have all of the lights, such a great atmosphere. Of course, the Bama fans are going to be fired up, and they should be, especially after the Tide gets back on track against Mississippi State. Let's talk briefly about last week. It felt like this was the Bama team that folks expect to see after the loss to Texas A&M. A big bounce back game, Matt, really on both sides of the ball. If you look at some of the numbers right here, 49-9 the final. Mississippi State held out of the end zone to just 3 field goals, which is pretty telling for a Mike Leach offense that is at least historically known to put up a lot of points. No rushing yards. Granted, this entire offense is all about the passing game, but still Bama, a very sound presence offensively and defensively. That's the type of bounce back win that you're looking for after the Tide took one on the chin at Texas A&M, Matt.
Yeah, and I think even though it's probably it's been overlooked, there were a lot of other bigger stories last week, but I think Alabama holding Mississippi State under 300 passing yards, I think, is an underrated achievement that I'm not sure people gave enough attention to a week ago. It is an offense that has been effective against legit SEC opponents this year. We know that they were able to move the ball and score a lot better against Texas A&M and against LSU. So it's noteworthy, I think, coming off of a game where there were long stretches of that Texas A&M game where it looked like Alabama could not stop anything offensively. The run defense was a big problem. We'll see if that's been altered at all today, and we'll talk about that in a second. But in terms of the secondary and being able to win those one-on-one matchups, being able to get a pass rush going finally and put pressure on a quarterback, Alabama was really, really good at it a week ago after, really just 1 week prior not being able to get anything right. So I even though I'm sure there was a difference happening in terms of the opponent's play level, Alabama made some improvements. They fixed some things. They were able to get back on the right track in terms of stopping an opposing offense that has been pretty good at doing what they do this year.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And they did it on the road in what is considered really a hostile environment in Starkville. So now Bama back in the friendly confines in Tuscaloosa, which is where they want to be and where they will be for a good little while now. And Saban was asked about this, kind of the team, their identity, Matt. He said this is that sort of game kind of defined what they wanted to be. Felt like Coach was overall pleased, but he knows that there's a lot still moving forward as to what he wants his guys to look like and on a more of a consistent basis. Like that's the performance he wants to see week in and week out.
Right now, based on what we just did, that's still sort of up in the air. If we continue to play like we played in the last game, play for 60 minutes, play hard, support each other, play together as a group, compete in the game, play the next play, not look at the scoreboard, I think that we can develop a really positive identity. I think we took the first step of that in the last game, and hopefully, we'll be able to build on that in the future.
Coach knows it's a building process. I mean, this is a marathon, not a sprint. That's what it is in the SEC. You have good games, you have bad games. So he's encouraged by what happened last week, Matt, but he wants to see this happen week in and week out. I think for Coach, to see his guys compete for 4 quarters to kind of keep their foot on the gas was very encouraging, regardless of who was in the game, what the score was.
For sure. I think, we had heard kind of the running theme this year from Saban is even before they lost to Texas A&M, the concern that he's had over and over again about this team was maintaining intensity for an entire game. And he had not seen that from his team. He was concerned about it before the Texas A&M game. It kind of came true in that game. And then this last week, I do think that there's a sign perhaps that the wake-up call worked. It woke people up. We saw a different level of intensity out of these guys. And you know what? The other thing that in some ways is encouraging is that it didn't just happen from the first snap of the game. It's not like they just suddenly kicked it on and played their best and hadn't been doing that previously. It actually took them about a quarter to let all those lessons sink in and start being enacted on the field. So I do think in some ways it shows that this team is still figuring some things out. They're still needing to process what their coaches are telling them, but they are doing that and they are figuring things out. Sometimes it can be done in practice. Sometimes it's not. The light's not going to fully come on until you're out there in the game. And I think we saw that a week ago. We'll see if they can get to it faster this week. I mean, I think they have some momentum when you go back and look at how they played towards the, in the second half of that game against Mississippi State. But wouldn't shock me again today if this team comes out from Alabama and looks a little bit rough, looks a little bit like they need to get their feet under them, especially defensively, before things kind of kick off against Tennessee.
Yeah, no question. If you're just tuning in, it's the Alabama Pregame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. He's Matt Scalisi. I'm Simone Eli. Week 8 of the season, third Saturday in October. Tennessee coming to Tuscaloosa. And Matt, the running joke is this really a rivalry? Like, what does it take to be a rivalry? Do you have to be competitive to be a rivalry? In my opinion, not necessarily. As Nick Saban would say and says every single year, literally every year, this game means a lot to a lot of people, and it does. Folks get their cigars ready. Everyone, goes to wherever their cigar shop. Everyone's good to go when it comes to cigars. Matt, do you feel like the fact that Alabama has won 14 straight in this rivalry hinders the significance?
I really don't, and I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody who's from Alabama, and I've lived here my whole life, and I have seen this rivalry over the years in times when it was more intense. And I'll just kind of give y'all, not to make it about me necessarily, but here I grew up in the 90s, so I was around here when Tennessee was dominating this series, and it bothered Alabama fans. I was also around here, and I was more college age when the stuff happened regarding Philip Fulmer and the NCAA investigation. And that really, I think for a lot of people, for people really kind of 30 and up, that will always be a big part of this rivalry that I think fuels the intensity of it. I think from the Tennessee side, I can't speak as much. I don't know if people in Tennessee have truly switched off their emotions about it and said, we don't care anymore. But I mean, maybe you have to do that for self-preservation purposes if you're a Tennessee fan. But I know that in this state, it's still a big deal. It's a rivalry that matters a lot to people. And as Saban had a great quote about it this week, he said, if you don't think it's a rivalry, basically said try and lose it and see how it feels. I think it would, at this point, the streak in and of itself is a big point of pride for Alabama fans. And it preserving it, stretching it as long as possible, I think that has become something that's important and a tradition in and of itself.
Yeah, Saban was asked about the rivalry on Monday as well. Let's listen into what Coach had to say.
I think the rivalry between, Tennessee and Alabama is, one of the old great rivalries in college football. It goes way back. I know it means a lot to a lot of people, in our state. Certainly means a lot to me, and hopefully we'll get that translated to our team. Josh Heupel has done a really good job at at Tennessee. Their team is playing really well. They're explosive on offense. They make a lot of big plays.
One of the best things I think about this game is that it is in Bryant-Denny Stadium, so no worries on Nick Saban getting anything thrown at him or players getting anything thrown at them like Volunteer fans like to do to their own stadium at home, of course, fined to the tune of $250K. But there's no question that fans get excited about this game. And honestly, Matt, it's kind of a defining thing for head coaches. A lot of coaches are kind of, it matters how well they did against their rivals. I mean, how well Saban's done against Auburn, how well Saban has done against Tennessee. Sometimes, Georgia gets in the mix a little bit as well, I guess, with Kirby Smart. But, these games matter in that regard. I think it's what Coach meant when he said, try losing it. Because then when you're on the losing side of it, you're getting criticized pretty strongly.
For sure. I think it's been relatively easy for Alabama fans to take this for granted because they have not had struggles with their rivals for the most part. Although I will say, if you want a good comparison, maybe look at the struggles that Alabama has had with Auburn during Coach Saban's career in Tuscaloosa. That one sticks in Alabama fans' craw. They are frustrated about it to some degree. They get a little nervous about the Iron Bowl, even when Auburn's not, a world beater. And I think that's just never been the case for Tennessee. And Tennessee has a lot to do with that themselves. They have been a total mess since about 2007, which, seemed to coincide right with Saban arriving in Tuscaloosa. But I think for the most part, this is a part of Alabama's identity now, right? I think your rivalry games and your ability to compete in them, whether it's one-sided or not, it becomes a part of how people remember that coach's time at that school, and it becomes a part of your program's identity. And I think Alabama's dominance of Tennessee, even though maybe to people outside of these two schools, it's not a big story. They yawn. They say, "Why is this a rivalry anymore?" It's a part of Alabama's identity at this point under Nick Saban to beat Tennessee every year.
Yes, it's a part of the fabric of really what's been built in Tuscaloosa recently. It's kind of funny. Coach just talked about Josh Heupel, what he has done with the Volunteers program, and give credit to him. It's kind of being called a resurgence. Granted, they are 4-3 overall, 2-2 in the SEC. James Robinson, don't bring him.
I got to just shake my head at James Robinson's dad joke here. That's pretty good.
That is definitely a dad joke, but I love it. Where do you get? We're getting a ton of comments, guys. That was a complete. I literally I thought I was living in a different universe when I was watching that last Saturday. I could not believe that Tennessee fans were literally doing that. And quite frankly, I'm just not going on a complete tangent about this game really quick, but I will say, at Tennessee, they were in a position to literally win the game. That's how ridiculous these fans are. They didn't understand they're literally still very much in contention of winning the game. Get the ball back. My thought was, if they score, I'm sorry, they did not earn that win. With the delay and everything, some people criticize me for saying that on social media. If those officials, they should not have even attempted to allow Tennessee to win that game. Had they made a play at the end there, that would have put them up, Matt. I know that sounds biased, but that's how
I think it's interesting and says to try and relate it to this week. I think it says something about this Tennessee team and kind of the program as a whole too, of where they are right now, which is that they actually do seem to have a little bit of momentum as a team under Josh Heupel. They don't look totally pathetic so far this year, but they've got a fan base that has so much, and whatever. You can say I'm wagging my finger at them, but I will. They've got a fan base that is so frustrated and so entitled, I guess, and impatient to let their new coach implement the things that he's doing, that they almost in some ways could have. I think ultimately Ole Miss was the better team last week, but they could have cost their team an advantage in that game, because when you're the team making the comeback, it's because the other team is, in part because they're worn out, they're tired, they are lacking energy. You do something like that and you stop the game for an extended period of time. Part of what they allowed to happen was they let Ole Miss catch their breath, and Ole Miss was able to close out that game. So
Yep.
in some ways, this Tennessee fan base is not maybe as bought in as the players are for Josh Heupel and the Tennessee program right now.
Mm.
Not going to be an issue today because there's not going to be a lot of Tennessee fans at this game today. They returned a lot of their tickets to Alabama before this game. So maybe that'll help Tennessee today. Maybe the fact that their fans aren't in the building could be a help more than
a positive. No one's
today.
being pelted with anything. There's no doubt. I mean, Tennessee fans remind me of like a guy who wants to like have this great marriage and like this life like work out, but they won't give anybody time. And they'll just start complaining. There's no patience. They have no patience to like work through the things you have to work through to get to having a good marriage. They have so much baggage that they always think about. I mean, whether it's Lane Kiffin as the baggage or the fact they haven't won in 14 straight against Alabama. So it's like they just can't get over what's happened. And so it doesn't allow them the ability to have any patience to make the marriage work. That's
and I'll tell you,
fans. That's what they make me think of.
And if baggage is a problem for you, Tennessee fans, you're gonna continue to struggle with Alabama because this is not some random opponent that you just happen to lose to every year for the last 15 years. This is a program that your former athletic director and head coach openly said, I'm trying to get them shut down, and I think forever there are going to be folks at Alabama who put extra emphasis on this game because that happened. There are going to be bad feelings between these two programs for a very long time because of that. So there's baggage when Tennessee plays Alabama, and I think this game today, I'd be really surprised if Tennessee is able to make it competitive, but down the road, if Josh Heupel is able to, do the things he wants to do and implement the stuff he's trying to, they could make it more competitive down the road. The question is, can Tennessee get out of his way and let their coach succeed and do the things he's trying to do? Because it hasn't been the case for the last, however, I don't even know how many coaches we're on now since Philip Fulmer.
No doubt. All right, let's talk a little bit of X's and O's. Hendon Hooker, the starting quarterback for the Volunteers, is expected to start. He was injured last week in that loss to Ole Miss, lower body injury. He is expected to go. He's a talented guy. He can run, he can throw, he does all the things. What kind of stands out to me that I think Tennessee fans don't even realize is that their run game ranks like 5th in the country. I mean, they can do some legit damage offensively. That's a huge improvement from a Volunteers team that we have seen literally struggle to even like get to kickoff at times. We look at some of the numbers right here. There's no question that Tennessee is very capable of putting up some very big offensive numbers, Matt. And something that you alluded to this earlier, that this Tide defense at times could struggle with a little bit early on until they kind of get their feet set and get going in the game. We've seen that throughout this season a little bit at times where the Tide defense takes a little bit of time to kind of get things going and get settled, I guess is the best word, against some of these offenses that are capable of putting up big numbers.
Yeah, and that those are interesting numbers to look at. You're not going to find a lot of teams that have similar per game metrics as Alabama offensively right now, or on the other side of the ball. But I think it's probably worth noting at this point, even though I wouldn't say Alabama's played the toughest schedule in America, I think Tennessee has still not really faced the best of their division yet. That we know that they still have that Georgia game ahead. They have a pretty tough back half of their schedule, and I think looking at what we have seen from them so far, I think the biggest questions around Tennessee are with their defense, and they have played relatively well defensively against a team like Ole Miss. I think they mostly did a pretty good job against an Ole Miss offense that can be really explosive, but it's not good enough in those games against the better offenses they've played to get it done against a team like Alabama that really is capable of scoring on just about every possession. So I think in terms of matchups in this game, Tennessee's big opportunity to make something happen in this game, in my opinion, is going to be you're going to have to rattle Bryce Young. You're going to have to do the same thing that Texas A&M was able to do, which is, first of all, shutting down the run is kind of a given. You have to do a decent job against Brian Robinson and that Alabama run game. You can't let him get 5 yards a carry like we know he can against some of the more average defenses. But if you're able to do that, we have seen some signs that Bryce Young sometimes makes not great decisions under heavy pressure. Now, he did a better job against Mississippi State with that last week, and that might be something that he's growing out of. But that might be the opportunity for Tennessee is take the run away and then try and get in Bryce Young's head. Try and take away those easy throws and make him have to make a difficult decision in a fast read. And, maybe his youth gets to him and he makes a mistake. But, I think it's tough. There are just so many weapons out there for Alabama that you have to be, whatever you're doing that's effective, you got to do it, down after down after down, and hope that Alabama eventually makes mistakes because of that.
Yeah, consistency definitely key in games like this. Appreciate Connie Williams pointing out that it's actually the 4th Saturday in October. It is the 4th.
It might technically be. Look, this is more of an honorary thing, I think.
It's an honorary thing, there's no doubt. We have to keep calling it the 3rd Saturday in October, but technically it is the 4th Saturday in October. I didn't really realize that. But regardless, all right, so let's look quickly at the SEC West outlook, Matt. Auburn is off today on the bye. Bama, of course, going into the bye after this week. Alabama right now 3-1 in the conference. Ole Miss 2-1, at least when you're looking at the West. When it comes to momentum, I understand this is a cross-divisional game here tonight, but when it comes to momentum and going into the bye week, Matt, and then finishing out the rest of the West schedule, this game really cannot be overstated how important this game is in terms of momentum for the Tide going into the backstretch rather of this season.
For sure. There's a couple of really tough teams, maybe 2 or 3 really tough teams in the back half of the schedule for Alabama. And, I think you look at what they've been able to accomplish so far. They've beaten some good teams. They've played in some really tough road environments. They have accomplished some things and shown themselves to be a really tough team, a team that's worthy of being considered for the playoffs right now. But they've also shown some vulnerabilities and some weaknesses. And I think the question is, did they learn from what happened at Texas A&M? Will that ultimately stand out as a moment that taught this team and spurred this team to get better? Or will it stand out as this is the moment we knew that this Alabama team wasn't legit? So I think closing out the first sort of half of the season with a dominant effort today would be a very good sign for Alabama. Again, you look at the rest of the league right now that Alabama's competing with. They've got LSU coming up, which who knows? I mean, I think a lot of chaos entering that game. No matter how good they've looked against Florida, they've looked just as bad in other games. So there's just no way to tell which LSU you're getting from week to week. We know Arkansas is still ahead for Alabama. That's a team that has not won a lot of games this year, but they've played everybody really tough. They're a very physical team. Yeah. And then you've got Auburn waiting at the end of the season, who just starting to look sort of better and better, and like they're figuring things out. So there are challenges ahead from Alabama, and I think this is an opportunity for them to kind of kick off that second half of their schedule with some positive momentum and kind of making an announcement to everybody that we stumbled, but we figured it out, and watch out. You should be afraid to play us in the second half of the season.
Yes, absolutely, guys. So the kickoff here at Bryant-Denny Stadium set for 6 o'clock. So you have some time to chill. Until then, that you'll be interested in taking a look at 2:30. Matt's jumping the gun. He's trying to end.
No, I'm good. Sorry, wrong button.
If you there's a couple other games. The 2:30 game, Matt. You're just talking about LSU. This is one that Bama fans want to keep an eye on, and one of the most bizarre situations, I guess you can say, in college football right now, with Ed Orgeron, finishing his last season at LSU. It's kind of like his swan song, I guess. Who knows with LSU what's going on? These Tiger players could just be super fired up to want to get it done for Coach week in and week out, but they'll be at Ole Miss today at 2:30. A big game when it comes to what things look like in the West.
Absolutely. I don't know that I think Alabama fans are always going to be concerned first and foremost with, win our games and we're fine. We control our own destiny still, but be nice to remove LSU from the picture a little bit, which is what would happen today if Ole Miss is able to pull that off. So we'll see. There's pretty significant injuries on both sides in that game, so that's going to be an interesting one too.
Yes, it definitely will. Mississippi State at Vanderbilt at 3. Of course, the big one, Tennessee, Bama at 6. And then a night game that nobody we watching Tennessee, Bama is South Carolina and Texas A&M. Auburn off this week, Arkansas playing non-conference. So that's pretty much the rundown throughout the SEC, Matt. But week 8 already of the season, Bama trying to get a big win against Tennessee going into the bye. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
I don't know. It's kind of, not a super big week out there in college football. I think for Alabama, Tennessee, this is probably a game that you don't mind having the spotlight a little bit if you're Alabama. Yeah. Last thing a lot of people remember about you is you losing to Texas A&M, and now you have a chance to give them a different last impression of you before you head into that bye week. So big opportunity for Alabama today, I think.
We appreciate everyone tuning in. Chris Camp, thanks for the kind words. You guys rock. Roll Tide Roll. Right back at you, Chris. And guys, get your cigars ready. Don't smoke them yet. Smoke them if you got them later on. Sometime probably in the third quarter. Bryant-Denny Stadium might be filled up with some smoke. We've seen that in the past. But guys, enjoy it. If you're going to the game, be safe. If you're not going to the game, still be safe. Kickoff set for 6 o'clock. The third Saturday, technically the fourth, though, in October. Alabama, Tennessee, Ty looking to roll against the Volunteers for the 15th straight time in this rivalry game. All right, guys, thanks for tuning into the Alabama Pregame Show, brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. For Matt Scalisi, I'm Simone Eli. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Medical Properties Trust, at the very heart of healthcare.